All right, so let's get this thing started. Thank you all for joining us today. And of course, thank you to our special guests from Ghostbusters Afterlife for being here today. Very nice to see all of you.
Hello, nice to see you.
Hello, thanks for having us.
Hello.
I think it's fair to say that I'm very excited about this special event today for a number of reasons. First, of course, because you're all such fun people to talk to, so that's a good reason. Of course, what's more fun to talk about than Ghostbusters? That's another good reason. And then finally, the questions I'll be asking have been submitted by people all over the world, big Ghostbusters fans, post-production fans from all over the world. So that means that much less work that I have to do. So I'm excited about that as well. And we'll get into those questions. There's the ones that are rolling in are pretty fascinating. But before we do that, I thought it'd be fun to start things off by having everyone introduce themselves. And so the way I'd like you to handle this is introduce yourself, what your role was on Ghostbusters Afterlife. And finally, when somebody asks you what you do, which I know that they do, and you tell them I'm a big shot post-production star, and they invariably follow that up with, okay, well, what would I know you from? What have you worked on? What are the one or two things you make sure to tell them prior to Ghostbusters Afterlife? So Dana, I thought we would start with you.
Of course, you have to start with me. Thank you.
Of course.
My name is Dana Glauberman. I am co-editor with Nathan Orloff, for Ghostbusters Afterlife, and a few of my prior projects that I've worked on. This kind of goes against what you were just asking, Matt. But Ghostbusters is my 7th feature with Jason, along with a couple of other projects. But Jason Reitman projects, Juno, Up in the Air. Those are probably 2 that you have recognized and have seen. And then aside from those projects, most recently Mandalorian.
Very good. And the aforementioned Nathan Orloff. Nathan.
Yes, hi, I'm Nathan Orloff, one of the editors of Ghostbusters Afterlife. Most recently did a comedy on Hulu called Plan B. But before that, before I was an editor, I worked at Bad Robot on films like The Force Awakens, Star Trek Into Darkness, and 10 Cloverfield Lane. Those are sort of the more known things I've worked on before Ghostbusters Afterlife.
Those are some good ones, and probably a natural way to move forward to Mr. Will Files.
Hey, I'm Will Files. I was the supervising sound editor along with Perry, and sound designer and re-recording mixer on Ghostbusters. And I have had the good fortune of working on a lot of cool movies, including working with Nate on 10 Cloverfield Lane and Star Trek Into Darkness, and the original Cloverfield, actually all the Cloverfield movies, Venom 1 and 2, Thor: The Dark World, Star Trek, or Star Wars, Force Awakens, a bunch of Pixar films, and this was, probably my crowning achievement as a young Ghostbusters nerd.
I knew you couldn't stop at 1 or 2 files. Okay, Barry, how about you?
Put it down.
Show off.
I can never remember what I work on. I always have to go to IMDb and think about what the heck did we work on.
My name is Perry Robertson. I co-supervise with Will, and this is I think I counted up 11th project with Jason Reitman, and probably more than that with Dana, and close to that. No, not that many with Nathan, but close to it. And you know me from anything from Juno, Up in the Air. Well, back in the days, it was We Were Soldiers and Black Hawk Down and things like that when I was with Soundalux. But now that I have my own company, we started with what was Open Range, and all through the Reitman stuff, and I don't know, just a little bit of everything.
Okay, I think we'll jump into the audience questions now as they're coming in. I'm going to redact the last names because knowing our audience, some of them are probably on the wrong side of the law. And I also don't know exactly where they might be. I get cities, I don't get states. But let's start things off with Jordan from New York. And he or she is asking, they are asking, describe the hiring process for this project. What relationships did you have to get this? Who is the decision maker for this project? Which is an awesome New Yorker question. Basically, they're saying, hey, who you got to know to get on Ghostbusters? So yeah, let's obviously there's the Jason and Ivan connection for some of you, but how'd you get on this project?
Well, I think I was the newbie here. I mean, all these guys have worked with Jason on prior projects. You know, Perry and Dana have worked on half a dozen at least movies with Jason. And the only time I'd met Jason was when Nate was working on his previous film, and I came by just because there was some question about speaker calibration in the cutting room, and I was in the neighborhood, and Nate said, "Hey, can you pop by and just take a look at this?" And I met Jason, and I remember him thinking he was a very sincere, very sweet guy. Just had a very quick impression. And then I got an email, I don't know, a year or two later, from my friend Gil Kennan, who's a director and screenwriter and wrote this movie along with Jason. And he said, "Hey, what are you up to? We've got this little like secret skunkworks operation that nobody at Sony knows about. And my buddy Jason needs some help on it." And I said, I wonder what that is. I wonder if that could be Ghostbusters. Nah, no way. It could be Ghostbusters. And so I got in touch with Jason, and he said, "So we're making a Ghostbusters movie." And I was like, "What?" So that's basically how I got involved with it, was through my friend Gil, who I'd done this movie called Monster House with a long, long time ago. And he knew that I was a big Ghostbusters fan. And I think he thought that I'd probably get along with Jason. So that was the connection there. And then we did a little teaser trailer, and that went really well. And Jason said, "Hey, I'd love you to do the movie, and I'd love you to do it with my friend Perry, who's done all my last few movies." And I said, "Great." So then me and Perry met, and then we did the movie.
A bromance came.
That's right.
Now, it was. They told me that Will was going to do the movie, and my wife laughed because she said it's the first time I've ever seriously lobbied anybody for doing a movie. And I talked to Jason and said, I'd really love to do the movie, but it worked out great because, there's no way that me and my crew could have done this movie by ourselves. And we needed the Sony connection. We needed Will and Chris as, these incredible sound designers. And it just, I don't know how it worked out, but it worked out so incredibly well between Will and I and Chris Terhune and Scott Sanders and Kevin Zimmerman and Diego and everybody that worked on the movie. It was just this, I don't know. It was from start to finish. It was such a pleasure. And
we had a lot of fun, and it was a small crew.
Yeah.
It was not the kind of crew that would normally be on a movie of this scale. Perry, I think you'd agree. It was a bit like it was a skeleton crew in a lot of ways.
It was, but luckily we had a little bit of time on it. And I think, when we get tracks from Dana and Nate, and, we pretty much know what we have to go for. And, it was, I don't know. It was such a pleasure. I mean, and I can say this with Dana and Nate on the stage, except for the very first day, it was great.
What are you talking about? The first day was perfect.
The first day is never good.
Yeah.
Well, somebody is going to have to answer what the first day was.
Yeah, Perry, well, you guys were brought in really early, exceptionally early for the general process. I mean, we had you involved really early on.
Right.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons we had such a small crew, because we wanted to stretch it out as long as possible.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So that we were able to, basically the way we worked on this film, which is the way we do a lot of movies these days, is we would work on a scene. Like the first scene we worked on was Phoebe turning on the proton pack for the first time. And
that was the first thing that they shot.
Was it?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That was the first thing we cut. That was the first thing Jason, when Perry and I and the guys went up to visit Dana and Nate in their editing rooms, that was the first scene they showed us. And I said, can we get our hands on this? Like, I want to get started. This is so cool. So we started cutting it, and we sent them a version of it as like a 5:1 mix. And they put that into the Avid Media Composer and mix it against the dialogue and the music that they already had going in their cut. And that's basically the way we did the whole film. We would just feed them stems, like, maybe like an effects and a background stem or a Foley stem. And then Dana and Nate could basically take that and do their own balance on it against the other elements. And that was really helpful, not only in the sense that it was like a feedback loop where they would hear what we were doing. They would, do their own tweaks to it, and then we'd get it back in an AAF and say like, oh, okay, well, they're pushing that and they're pulling that and they're totally getting out of that. And it was really also useful to see Nate and Dana and Jason had basically figured out the kind of structure of the mix by sending them our stuff. They had a chance to say, okay, Jason was like, well, what if we take all the sound away here except for this rumble, like when she's looking into the pit. And it's just this kind of cool suspended moment. And I heard that when I got the AF back, and I go, oh, I know what they're going for here. I get it. So it was
those mix
it's a
moves
great
got baked
feedback
in.
loop. Yeah, because then I could take the moves that they were doing and literally copy them to my masters. And then I had the same shape that they had gotten used to on the Avid side.
I mean, that's one of my least favorite things. Going to the mix stage is when all of a sudden you have to re-explain all the things you wanted to do in the mix. You had that. You guys had that.
Yeah, like the structural stuff. That's, obviously we're always going to embellish it and detail it out and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of like figuring out how do we want to shape this experience for the audience, so much of that actually originates often in the cutting room.
So it should come as no surprise that there's some redundancy to some of these questions, but it should also come as no surprise that a lot of them are about, connecting back to the original film. Nick from Cincinnati, Alana from San Francisco, both have questions about conventions from the original films that you wanted to either refashion or bring forward. I think part of the question was, did you try to make it have the same look and feel as the original, or instead make it something completely different? I'm sure the answer is probably a little of both, but just tell us about the things that you wanted to do to make it Ghostbusters, but also to make it Ghostbusters Afterlife.
I mean, Jason, from a visual effects standpoint, at the very least, and a visual standpoint, and I'll let Perry and Will go to the sound because it applies there too, really wanted it to feel a movie plucked from a different era almost. That's why lots of music's all vintage. We did as much practical effects that were reasonable to do so. The CGI effects, Jason was always pushing back against the visual effects departments for not trying to get too fancy, to be really simplistic in the movements of especially Muncher. To really try to make it as if like, yes, it's a CG character and we can do whatever we want, but what if it was a puppet? What if it was a practical thing that someone had to do there? What are the limitations that you run into? Dina sort of figured out a way to speak that language, and I think the result speaks for itself, in that the visual effects feel very, very Ghostbusters-y, but obviously we have a car chase through the middle of a small town that you could not do in the 80s.
Dana, maybe this is something you want to take, but just balancing between, something being an Easter egg versus it actually providing context. In other words, there's certain things in there like, I have to explain something here so that they understand where this story really originated back in 1984 versus, something like, the Stay Puft Marshmallow Men that are fun, but they weren't totally necessary to driving the narrative. So just tell me a little bit about that balancing act between making it, loyal and adhering to the original and educating people as the context of the original story versus like, we don't need to get beyond this being an Easter egg.
I think the best way to answer that is you don't have to have seen the original Ghostbusters in order to see Ghostbusters Afterlife and appreciate it for what it is. I think the big Ghostbusters fans who know the 84 movie will be able to pick those little Easter eggs out. Like when Phoebe goes downstairs into the basement and sees all these things, there's little things in there that, and I don't want to spoil anything for anyone who hasn't seen it, but there's little props that are in there that original Ghostbusters mega fans will notice. So I don't think you have to. I mean, it's great if you do see it because you can connect certain storylines and story points and characters to this one, but you don't necessarily have to have seen it to become a Ghostbusters fan to enjoy the experience of the movie.
Yeah, I've got a story on it because we were talking about a while ago if it was me and my company or Will and his company do it, but luckily Will works very closely with Sony, so he was able to go back in and get all these amazing sounds from '84, which thank God for Sony, like keeping these sounds. He went back and found
someone
everything.
did a very good job of archiving that movie.
Exactly.
That's great.
And go ahead, Dana.
No, go on.
I was just going to say, but luckily that was one of the things that was great about working with Will and Sony is we would have never had the ability to go into those archives like Will and his folks did, and we had people. I got to see it at Comic-Con in New York, and I actually had people that found out what I did on the movie, and they were asking me about, well, did you actually use those real sounds or did you have to recreate them? It's like, those are the real sounds right there. Yeah, Will and Scott and Chris and everybody, they used those, but they embellished them. But those are all the original sounds of the proton pack and the ghost trap and all that kind of stuff. Is just, anyway, Will can talk more about that.
Well, it was really cool because, like Perry is saying, we were actually able to get our hands on not only the original stems and that sort of thing, but the original like work tapes from the sound designer back in 1984, Richard Beggs. And we would go. It was tons of material. We went through it all, and we realized very quickly that there was a lot of sounds that they made for the first film that never made it in the first film. There was basically all these alternate versions of the sounds that we know. And we realized, this is all raw material that we can use to sort of create, we called it like Egon tech. Like we wanted all the tech in the movie, even the new things, to feel like it's something from his workshop, from his world. And so we would use all these sounds to supplement the stuff that was featured in the original film. We also even went through the stems and like stole little tiny bits of, Easter egg material. Like when Phoebe slides down the pole into the workshop, that sound is actually stolen from when Dan Aykroyd slides down the pole in the first film. And it has a really specific character to it. And we use that again when Carrie Coon slides down, when the mom slides down into the same spot. And it's just one of those things that maybe you don't even clock it, but it's there, for the real nerds like me that have probably seen the original movie 100 times. It's like, in your subconscious. Plus, they're just cool sounds and they've got a vibe. We even sampled the noise floor from the original multi-track recording of the score. We sampled some noise and laid it in under the beginning of the film to give it like an 80s tape noise feel. Which, again, it's one of those things that hopefully no one like thinks about, but it just feels right. Like as soon as the Sony logo comes on, you hear the noise floor come up as if it's like a tape recording.
It feels right, and it's familiar, but you don't necessarily put your finger on what it is.
Yeah.
Or where
that's from. Pretty wild. Well, it should come as, so next couple of questions, from Cyril and Bella Kinwood and Alexander and Lakanyata. Exactly what you just said. How much legacy sound effects are used in this new feature? How was the integration of the Canon sound design to the Afterlife sound design? Which you pretty much answered, maybe if you want to elaborate. But there's also a question about, is it frustrating or liberating to have pre-existing legacy sound effects? It certainly sounds like in a lot of ways it's liberating, but I'll let you get into that.
Well, in the case of this movie world, it's very liberating because they're great sounds. If we were stuck with kind of hokey sounds, but these are some of the best sound design from its era. And we often found that in order to update it to sound like a modern film, we had to augment it. And, the sounds aren't as full range as what we're used to. A good example of that is the terror dog sounds. They have a very specific kind of snarly growl. And it's as far as we could tell, we think it was made from big cats like lions and tigers. And so we put in the original sounds that we were able to extract, and we realized like, oh, it sounds kind of thin, kind of sounds like old fashioned. And the ways, Jason was shooting it was very in our face and wanted kind of bigger sounds. So we basically had to figure out, how can we take these original sounds and add more modern recording, high fidelity, full range material around it in a way that feels naturalistic and like an extension of the original sound, but still make it have the inherent character of the original sound. So that was something we did for the entire film. I mean, the Proton Pack, Ecto, the Terror Dogs, all the elements of the film started, the base of them was always the 84 identifiable sound design. And then we just sort of rounded it out, expanded it, made it bigger.
So our next question is from Sharon in Los Angeles, and I think I know who this is. She wrote her question in all caps, so I think from now on she's going to be known as Sharon, all caps. Did you find that in editing and directing, you and Jason used his dad and Sheldon Shelley Kahn's cut for a template or for inspiration? So going back to that original cut of Ghostbusters, anything there that you drew from for Afterlife?
I'm trying to, I think the final scene with there definitely were a few scenes when Callie and Gruberson come together. It was very specific. It was Jason specifically directed it very much, I think, like the original 84, with the Terror Dogs and all of that. And so there were things inherent in Jason's directing that he mimicked a lot of how it was shot in 84, and it was given to us, and we of course elaborated on it. There definitely were a few things.
Yeah.
But in terms of taking it verbatim, I don't think, we would sometimes look at some of the original scenes from the 84 movie and just to kind of get inspired by things, and then go about doing our own cut.
The only verbatim one that I can think of is the transformation on the stairs.
Yeah, that's the one.
It's because that's a specific dog lightning reaction shot, right. And we wanted that to be, and he shot that just like you were saying, Dan. Like he shot it to be like the exact angle over the shoulder. Here's the two dogs. Honestly, the thing when we talked about when Ivan would bring up cutting with Shelley, or Dana would talk about even her experiences with Shelley, was like the amount we would need to explain. Ghostbusters is surprisingly just barrels forward as a film, and you just accept all the weird stuff that happens. And that's, Jason always had like held that candle, where oftentimes I'm like, clarity, 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 so confused. And it's like, if it's an adventure film, you just got to keep going forward. People will accept the universe because you like it, and it's true. And that's something that I think was a huge distillation of understanding how the cut of the original film just worked.
I think it's also just a reflection of Jason in many ways is a classic filmmaker. I mean, his dad too. Like they both are sort of classicists in terms of their style. Mm-hmm. They're not really showy necessarily. I mean, it can be quite technically, if you look at even the 84, I mean, technically it's quite an achievement, but it's done in a way that is very classicist. And so you don't see a lot of fast cutting in either of their films. And that was something that really struck me right away watching the first cuts that these guys were putting together. Was like, oh, this feels like not old fashioned, but like a classically made film,
Well, you mean, just as Will was talking about, like the sound team did some discovery and some forensic, analysis of the original material. There's a shot in Afterlife that was shot for Ghostbusters and not used in Ghostbusters. I mean, one that's obvious, maybe there was more and I didn't see it, but did Dana, did you and Nate go through a process where you're looking for, looking at old footage that was not used in the original film and finding a way to integrate it into Afterlife?
There was really only one piece, if I remember correctly, that we used from the original. It was a scene that was actually cut out of the movie, out of the original, and we use it as a YouTube video. It's Ivan's wife, Jason's mom, and Jason's sister, Catherine, running out of a building. And we use it in a YouTube video when Mr. Gruberson is explaining what happened in 1984 with ghosts taking over New York City. And so that's the only piece of the original, I think, right, Nate?
Well, there's the post credit scene.
Oh, right. There's post-credit scenes, but not story-wise. Yeah.
Story-wise, yeah. Those were all just alternate angles.
Not actual footage from, I mean, it's our own footage, but the same idea.
Yeah. Yeah, the footage that the YouTube video is fun to get scans of and look through, and pull and try to make it a live newscast type of thing. But that was
it was really cool when we did use that little piece of Annie Potts and Harold Ramis.
That's the one I was thinking.
Yeah, it was really fun. Like for me, it was really cool because we got the actual piece of production sound, and I was like, wow, I feel like I'm mixing the original film for a second here, and it was fun we added a bunch of sounds there to sort of try to recreate that moment in the film where there's lots of crowd action and there's police sirens and that sort of thing going on. And we first put it all in kind of the way we would mix a modern film, and it sounded weird up against this older, image and older kind of thinner sounding dialogue. So we actually ended up kind of like filtering all the background sounds that we were adding to make it feel like more like literally more like the 84 version, as if this was, a whole chunk of the movie that had been snipped out and dropped into this one.
I thought you guys grabbed a stem from the original. I didn't, because I wasn't there when you guys mixed that exact portion.
There was one element that we stole from the original, but we couldn't find a piece long enough to do what we were trying to do.
Yeah, makes sense.
So we had to build it.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was cool.
As far as building things, Perry, I got one for you here, or two actually. So Daniil from Hampton somewhere, and Ryan from Montclair. Sound design for ghosts, or crafting a ghost sonic character. Where do the ideas for the character come from in terms of the sounds? Let's Muncher. Like how is Muncher? He's a whole cloth character. Is he something new for this universe? How did you do the sounds for Muncher?
We give credit to who did it. It was Josh Gad, right? That did all the voices of him, and he came in one day and just Jason let him loose, and we were doing everything we could not to crack up laughing over a good take, because he was so. It's fun when you get somebody that is that talented and just let them go, and it's amazing what people like that do, or say all the people that worked on the Marshmallows, the things they were coming up with were just, we had a ton of stuff to choose from for those guys. And it's just picking the right voice or whatever for that.
That was the hardest part, was assembling it all. Perry had literally hundreds of tracks for the Marshmallow Men, because we had done multiple sessions. And on top of that, we had been doing temp stuff for both Muncher and for the Marshmallows for months. So
did you run out of tracks in Pro Tools?
We did. we actually had a point
specific beat.
Yeah, we had a point where we couldn't import any more tracks because we had too many tracks.
But part of that was too that as part of it was problem with COVID, because a lot of times we'll do scenes like that, say for group or whatever, and we'll do them all together. And I don't know. I think it's kind of lucky we were in COVID, because it kept everything separate and we could pick and choose whatever we wanted to. But it also made for some stressful
Hell of a
long
lot of
hours
tracks.
trying to figure out which ones we were going to use. But
Yeah.
it worked out in the end.
Well, and it's an interesting thing, the whole idea of how do you create a character voice, right? Because we had been trying stuff ourselves for months on Muncher, and we tried even animal sounds and things like that.
Didn't you inhale helium at one point?
Yeah, well, for the
marshmallows.
For the Marshmallow Man, we bought a bunch of balloons, and the whole crew came in, and we all spent a couple hours inhaling helium and making sounds. Some of those made it in the movie. Actually, the guy in the blender at the end, he goes, ah, "That's me." Helium.
That's great.
After he gets blended up, he smiles, and that's me on helium.
I thought I recognized you.
Yeah, but it was interesting because it was a lot of trial and error, and eventually Jason realized that he's like, guys, I think we need an actor. I think we need a real actor to create a character for us. And luckily, he knew Josh Gad, and I think he might have literally just run into Josh on the Sony lot and
so
said,
too.
"Hey, what are you doing? Let's go. You want to make some ghost sounds for me?" And like Perry said, we were, dying because the stuff he was coming up with on the spot, like right away, he started coming up with these wild sounds. And then we knew we just had this whole treasure trove of material to work from. So then it was taking that, a lot of stuff. He sort of did it to picture, but he also sort of freestyled a lot of it. And then we would sort of take the best bits, and Jason started identifying what parts of it he liked the most. And then we would craft the whole performance out of that. It was really fun. It was a lot of work, but it was very cool. I'm very, very happy with how it turned out.
I think a lot of people are.
Yeah.
Samantha from Clinton Township. Was the film editing easier to tackle with two editors? Well, I would hope so. Otherwise, somebody was doing something wrong. Nate, why don't you take this from a perspective of, you talked about working on the on stage, on set stuff towards the end, the farmhouse stuff. Just tell us about how the workload was balanced between you and Dana.
Well, initially, and this is, we sort of set out to do, the divide was to do that Dana would handle the comedy and drama scenes, and I would handle more of the VFX action scenes. And that was based on more of my work just being around and through the process on at my time at Bad Robot, just like VFX reviews and all of the work I did on those films, being comfortable in those environments and seeing how they've developed. By the end, Dana and I were like peas in a pod. We're working on everything and helping each other with everything. And we helped each other even in the assembly process. I'd go to her for advice when I'd get stuck on something and whatnot. But so that's the reason that towards the end of the production, I went to Calgary when they were on the stage stuff. Basically, I started working on the Muncher Chase storyboards in January of 2019. So almost 3 years ago. So I worked on those and talking about stems that Will pulled, because Will did the teaser trailer. We did the announcement teaser. So we had the stems from the original. So I was using those as sound effect beds to create the storyboard Muncher Chase that basically turned into like an animated film at 1 frame per second. I had a music cut that stayed almost the same all the way through 10 until Rob did it. And those storyboards, when they shot second unit in the summer on location, dropped in the second unit shots, it worked, tweak. And then I went to Calgary when they were shooting on stage, and Video Assist would run over with a take, and I'd drop in the take, and we'd say, like, does this work? Does this not work? Talk about it, etc. And meanwhile, Dana's working on the heart of the movie. That's like these characters that you have to love, otherwise you don't care about this chase. And so it was great to get those fresh perspectives and bounce everything off each other.
So same question for the sound guys. I mean, obviously there's two of you and you have your teams. How do you divide the workload?
Well, I kind of concentrated on the dialogue and the ADR, and then Will, with all his expertise, and especially since he was mixing the effects, took the effects and the sound design, and Scott Sanders, who usually works with me, and Chris Terhune took on a lot of the sound design along with Will, and Kevin Zimmerman, who works with me as well. he was able to, he went through and made a pass on backgrounds, and then he would help me on the ADR and stuff like that. And it was actually a pretty easy divide. And then if Will had questions, he would call me. If I had questions, I'd call Will. And again,
I leaned on Perry a lot for his expertise with Jason, basically. I'd say, how do you think Jason's going to feel about this thing or whatever,
Yeah. And as usual, 90% of the time I was wrong. So, but we had a starting place anyway.
I would have been even more wrong.
But it was fun. For me, it was fun too, because I've worked with both Nate and Dana, and watching their two styles, I was kind of wondering how it was gonna work. But it was, not wondering whether it was going to work. I knew it would work at some point, but it was like one editor after a while, and you guys were you took the best parts of both of you guys. And Dana's storytelling is, to me, I even texted her something like 2 nights ago. I was like, I watched some movie, and again, it's up in the air again. I'm like, man, your editing's so smooth and great. And then you look at Nate, who's come up through the newer generation and the quicker cuts and stuff like that, and he's the boss man at that. And then you take Dana and put her on top of the quick cuts it was great watching their collaboration. It was fun with our collaboration.
Well, and the cool thing was, it didn't feel like, I know you guys sort of focused on, more the action scenes, more the emotional scenes, but it didn't feel unconnected. I think maybe, right, Perry, that's part of what you're saying is like, right, I didn't feel like we were watching two different movies, which, a lot of times on these kinds of movies, it can feel like, suddenly we're in a action scene and it feels like a completely different film. Sometimes because the second unit director literally shot the scene and the director wasn't even there. So that's a whole other aspect of it. But yeah, this film very much felt from start to finish like it was one kind of unified feel. And I love, the pacing, the movie, talking to Jason, the way he describes the pace of the film is that, he knew we had to start with a big opening to sort of show everybody, including the studio, this is going to be a big movie. It's going to feel like Ghostbusters. Don't worry, because then when you drop into a lower gear for the next couple of reels to introduce all the characters, the film unspools at a little bit of a slower rate. But Jason described it as a slingshot, where you sort of pull back for 2 or 3 reels, and then by the time you let it go, by the time they leave that police station, you're just off. As soon as that part kicks in for me, I've watched this movie 100 times, and every single time I see it, I'm just like, yeah, let's go. It's so fun when Ecto comes ripping out of the garage with the siren blaring and everything. From that point on, it does not let up, and it's so fun. I love it.
Well, you mentioned having to have the importance of having that opening scene to make it, let people know, like, this is going to be a big movie. This is Ghostbusters. From a story standpoint, were there any minor to major restructurings of the storyline to, as you were working on it, so that it felt more like Ghostbusters, or that it worked better?
Through the editing process, I think, there is a certain level of things that evolve and become very clear to us as filmmakers, things that work, things that don't work. And so through the process, we would take scenes out, we would put scenes back in, we would be like, that works, no, that doesn't work, and bounce ideas off of each other. And that's just the natural progression of movie making and of our process in post.
But I don't
know
feel
if that answers your question, but
there was no big plots completely dropped. Everything just got simpler.
Mm-hmm.
Everything just got simplified.
Yes.
And this is to me totally true with lots of times, is like people read a script, and as reading a script, you want to know more, because it's not as emotive as watching a movie. Reading a script is like a car manual for a film to me. And if you feel something, then great, it's worked really well. but it's still, it reads like you're reading instructions on how to make a movie. And so you can't rely on a look. So there was originally a lot more about Callie and, the backstory and the details. And, when that gets slowly ironed out and you like massaging bubbles out of like a screen protector, you just sort of like, eventually get what you need, and it's smoother, and you don't need all the details. You don't need everything.
I got to tell you, Nate, that's the first time anyone's ever used that analogy on me. Well done.
Dana will tell you,
Taking bubbles
I'm
out
a
of a
little
screen-
famous for weird analogies.
That's true.
Yes. Yes.
Much appreciated. Okay, some more specific questions around sound for both of you. For Dana and Nate, did you work in surround or stereo or even LCR? What did you work with in terms of audio monitoring in picture editorial?
Well, this is the first movie that I've worked on that we cut in 5.1. And it was a big adjustment for me because I've always done LCR. But Nate was a huge proponent of setting us up with 5.1 in the cutting rooms, and basically mimicking what we were gonna be carrying everything that we did in the cutting room over to the stage once we got there, for the most part, generally speaking. It was a big adjustment for me, and I'm kind of old school, and so it was a big learning curve, and I had a hard time adjusting. But I would just go into Nate and say, "How do I do? What was that magic mixer thingy that we used?"
The artist mix.
Yes, that. I would go into Nate and just be like, I want to do this, but how do I do this? I don't know how. And he would kind of advise me, but most of the mixing in the cutting room, for the most part, I left up to Nate because he was so good at it. And I generally, my process is that I generally cut picture and cut dialogue, and I leave the rest up to the assistants and the sound team, because that's what they're there for, and that's what they're hired to do. But it all worked out. I mean, we all really just kind of worked really well together. A true collaboration.
And that's just going back to sort of like the way that Dan and I sort of I think really complemented each other, was that I do like and have used effects and music while cutting, especially something in horror and action stuff. It helps create a pace, sort of a clock, a human rhythm, and that's one of the reasons I love mixing, and I love sitting there with the artist mix. And like Will was saying earlier, like we would turn over, like, here's the big broad strokes that Perry and Will are going to smooth out and make sound wonderful, but this is the idea, this is the concept. And then but Dana really taught me to just like, is a way to like, none of this needs to completely work without anything, and, as if you're on a mono edit, like it just needs to just work and track. And that's, I think, something that really was a nice puzzle pieces that fit well together.
Well, I should say that question was from Devin from West Palm Beach. But the second part of that question, for me anyway, is for the sound team, does it even matter to you? How does it impact you, I guess I should say, the choice that the picture editors make on how they work, whether it's LCR or surround stereo?
I mean, for me, it helps a lot, because it means that the director, the editors, of course, but also the director, who spends a lot of time with the editors, is hearing our work in a reasonably calibrated environment, in something that approximates what we're going to be eventually mixing the film in. I mean, we mix this film natively in Dolby Atmos, but 5.1 at least allows you an approximation of what we can do with Atmos. So it just helps the creative process in terms of the feedback loop. If they're listening in stereo on, tiny little speakers at whoever, who knows what level, it becomes harder to make a comparison back and forth. So, the thing we always try to avoid is for the director to come to the stage and be surprised by stuff that they don't like. or stuff that's new. The way I try to approach it is, get our work into the Avid Media Composer as early as we can, and update it as often as we can, so that by the time they get to the stage, it feels like, okay, this is what I'm familiar with. Okay, now how can we add to that? Because I think that additive mixing and additive requests from a director are much better inherently than negative ones like subtractive. Because if you go into a mix and the director says, oh my god, what is all this new stuff, I don't even know what I'm hearing, like, turn it all off, I can't deal with it. That's a much more inherently negative experience for them versus coming in and going, okay, this is pretty familiar. This basically sounds like what I'm familiar with. Okay, what if we also added some footsteps there? Okay, what if we also added a little, more sparks for that explosion or whatever? And a lot of times we'll have that stuff waiting in the wings and we can just turn it on. Or sometimes he'll come up with ideas that never even occurred to us. But it makes for a much smoother experience if it's not a whole bunch of crap they've never heard before. And it helped us get through. We had some very, very short temp mixes on this film, like 2 days to do, what was it, 6 reels?
Yeah, it's crazy.
And
I think it looked like we're at 8, right?
I think you're right. Yeah, and we were able to get through these temp mixes very quickly because it was basically just refining what he'd already been used to hearing in the Avid. So it makes the experience smoother, I think, all around for all of us.
Well, Perry, Will brought up the word Atmos, and there's a question from James Stone from Walnut Creek. How has Atmos changed how you work?
Oh my goodness.
It's a big question.
I don't know. I mean, I think it's more, especially for something like this, it's just broadened what we do. I don't think it's changed it that much. It makes things where you can hear them a little bit better. You can make, you can more things. I don't mean hear them better. How do I say? How do you say it, Will? Where you can.
Well, no, I think
distinguish them. You know what I mean?
It makes more room in the room.
Right.
It gives you a broader canvas to paint on. But I think we're still using the same paint. Like, I agree with Perry. The process hasn't really inherently changed that much. Like, obviously we have more channels now and we've got a bigger canvas, but the tools are largely the same as what we've always used. And the choices are largely the same. It's just that now we can get more detail in, and the playback experience in the real world is often much better because these systems have a more ability to self-calibrate themselves, and they're often newer rooms that they're going into. So if you go to see a movie in Dolby Atmos, you're almost certainly going to have a better theater going experience than you would in some old 5.1 theater.
So Sarah has a question that I really like. I'd like each of you to take a crack at this if you could. What was the most challenging scene to work on in the editing room or in the mix for this movie? And so maybe there's some overlap here. Maybe some of you share the same scene as being the most challenging, but let's go around the virtual room and each of you address what was the most challenging thing for you to work on in Ghostbusters Afterlife.
That's a good question.
I know mine.
You guys go first.
Any scene with the mini marshmallows.
You beat me to it. Yeah, it was
Perry and I had a lot of work on those scenes.
Partly because it was kind of one of the last things that was done by the CGI department, and so we kind of had I guess an idea of what it was going to be, but we never had the final. We didn't have the final picture until very late in the process, and then that's when you go, oh, that's what he wants there. That's what he.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now he wants it, and then he had a very, very, very specific idea of what these were going to sound like in his head, and to me that was we always, in all of his movies, it's always one scene. It's always one scene, but it's like every other director too. But there's always one scene that we have to like, we're going to grind this one out, but it was definitely the marshmallows for me.
That was the killer. And and they come up. There's a couple big scenes with them in the movie, and the hard part was not only picking the right sounds, but also orchestrating how there's so much going on because there's so many of them, and so it's like, well, what of these 8 things happening on screen do we actually want the audience to listen to right now? Because you can only really pay attention to like 1 or 2 things at the same time. So there was a lot of like, okay, this and then this and then this and then this and then that, and trying to figure out how to make it flow audibly to match what we were seeing.
And that was an example, I think, of something that almost happened in reverse. Most of the time, we would have the audio done, and then VFX would match it. I believe that's one of the reasons I think we were so effects driven. You guys were working so early, is that some of these things would have all this sort of done, and that was an opposite where they basically found the VFX, and then the audio had to match. You guys had to follow that, which is definitely a huge challenge.
Yeah, but
I think there was a lot of figuring it out on the fly.
But like you would think, and you would almost think that car chase was like going to be the biggest thing, but that actually was, because you had so much done and it was such a practical shoot. It was like, oh, okay, I know how this works. And once we got Josh in there, it was easy.
Dana, any scene for you stand out?
There's the one that keeps popping back into my mind as like top of the list is the first post-credit scene.
Yeah.
Because that is so specific to, and it kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the original. It's not using the original 84 footage, but the idea of it stems from the original, and getting that to work really well was a challenge for me because a lot of times when I cut, I overthink and I get so paranoid that it's not right. So I think that there were a number of iterations of that, but I think what the final version came out pretty great, and it's comedy. It's it has a lot in there for a lot of people to enjoy.
Well, I'd like to ask you a question about that. I mean, so there's the scene, when you're dealing with the post-credits scene, there's the scene itself, and then there's where it hits in the credits. And that's something you don't usually think about, but what's so great about that post-credits scene is when it happens, because what's happening is the audience is looking at the credits, they're seeing an actor's name and going, wait a minute, who did that actor play?
Right.
Did I miss that? And then you hit that post-credits scene, and the timing of when that comes in is so crucial.
Right.
So do you have a hand in that? Are you cutting that part as well, cutting where it sits in the credits? Or is that out of your hands by that point?
We talked about that, at great length. Where do we want it? Do we want it at the very end of the crawl? Do we want it to come in here? And it just felt natural, because like you say, the actor's name comes up and then you cut in, and, it just felt right. So much of what we do is instinct and feeling, and that was what felt right to all of us.
Well, you got me. You nailed. I was sitting there going, wait a minute, did I miss something?
Good.
So it worked. It worked perfectly on me.
Good.
There are so many questions we're never going to get to, but I do want to try and get in some of the bigger picture ones, especially when someone says I'm a teacher. So Nestor from Bogota wants to know about the tools you have to master to be considered a good sound editor, mixer, or picture editor. That's as much of that question as I think we can get to. And then by the same token, Jeff from Poughkeepsie says, I'm a teacher, and any advice for students hoping to enter the field. So maybe we'll roll those two up together and things you need to know from a technical standpoint, but also in terms of just good career advice. And again, that's another one we'll have to go around the room for.
Who wants to start?
Luckily for you, Matt, we're all avid users here. I think, at least on the sound side, there are obviously other tools out there, but Pro Tools is far and away the preferred weapon of choice in Hollywood, at least, here in Los Angeles and in the United States. I think it's a wonderful thing that we do all have the same platform to work on, because it means it's very easy to exchange material around. It's very easy to, come onto a different facility and be able to sit down and use the same tools. We obviously cut the movie in Pro Tools. We mixed the movie in Pro Tools as well using the Avid S6. And it was a completely virtual workflow from our point of view. So yeah, I would say if you want to work in Hollywood, you're probably going to have to learn how to use Pro Tools. But the good news is it's really fun. I think I've used them all, and I really find Pro Tools to be the most fluid and the most scalable.
As far as doing work in Hollywood, moving up, I mean, just be a people person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you have to deal with so many different personalities. You have to be successful. I mean, if you're going to be a sound supervisor, sound designer, sound a mixer, whatever it is, you have to be able to take your. I mean, you can't. Nothing is precious. You can't have anything out there that's precious. You have to let go of your ego a lot of times. You have to have the ego to go in and say, "This is what I think is going to work," but then you have to be able to let go of that ego. Sorry, and working on this, like I learned and thought Will did such a great job of. He had these amazing. He and Chris and Scott had these amazing scenes built. And if Jason didn't like something, okay, we'll take it out. No problem. You have to be able to just be, let it go and just be a nice person. You got to know your tools. You got to know your Pro Tools, your Avid, whatever it is. Yeah, everybody has to know that. But you got being a nice person and listening to other people. That's the biggest thing for me if I was teaching somebody.
And how about you two nice people in the picture editing department? What do you have to say?
I honestly think obviously definitely the tools, and remaining curious. I'm loving like the new version of Avid. I'm using it on my current show, 2021. So always kind of pushing myself to like not get sort of, just always shaking my process up to try to improve and get not just faster, but just sort of not getting in any, not get stuck. But the main thing I always say this to anybody asking me this kind of question is be an assistant. Just be an assistant. If my time as an assistant watching not just editors, but editorial is absolutely invaluable. And you can tell the people that walk into the situation that have no experience don't know how to be the fly on the wall and let these things go. And just like talking about being social, and this is such a social industry, that's not an energy that people respond well with. And you need to be, we're in these rooms with directors for so many hours a day and and you need to be comfortable with someone that you need to be someone that someone's comfortable being stuck in an elevator with. It's like, and I think observing is the best way, and being in assistant editor or assistant sound mixer and really learning from these people that are doing what you want to do versus the specific questions of this is how you master XYZ. The more time I'm spending in this chair, the more I'm realizing that I'm not a master at all. Like I'm just like, it's a very humbling position working with directors like Jason and Ivan, constantly learning.
Excellent. And you, Dana?
I 100% agree with everything that these three have already said. I think it's really important to, as far as picture editor goes, start at the bottom and work your way up. It might not be what you want to do, but I think it's really important to learn the ropes of how an editing room is run. I also think it's important to ask questions when the time is right. I always keep my assistants involved and call them in. And on this movie specifically, Nate, whenever Nate or I were finished assembling a scene, we would call the entire crew in and, get feedback from everybody. So be aware of what just be conscious of what you're looking at and, give feedback, because that's the way you're going to learn. And I think, if you have any particular editor or sound designer or sound supervisor or anyone who you look up to and admire, reach out to them. It's very easy to get contact information either through certain websites or through agents or whatever. Agents will forward emails to, like love letters, not love letters, that's the wrong term. But, fan mail to me often. And when the time is right, I try and respond to a lot of them, because I like to be able to bring people in and give career advice. And, I think that's the way to bring people into our industry. But I've been in this business a long time. I don't know it all. I learned so many things from Nate and even from Will and Perry on this movie that I never knew about before. So be open to learning throughout your entire career.
Well, and to Dana's point, just a real quick thing. I always tell people just to ask questions. It doesn't matter, because if you ask somebody if you ask somebody a question and they know what they're talking about, they'll talk to you all day long. Believe me, anybody in this industry will sit and talk. If you ask Will a question, if he's got time and he's not on the stage working, he will tell you everything you want to know about mixing. Same thing with Nate, same thing with me, same thing with Dana. It's just ask them. And if they don't have time right then, say, is there another time I can talk to you? And usually they will just talk and talk and talk. That's what I used to find out. I mean, if I was talking to any mixer before me or any sound designer or whatever, I mean, it was just, you just ask them a question. And if most people in this business, I'd say 99% love their job and they love talking about their job. And I remember there's a guy named Harry Cohen, who's an amazing, amazing sound designer. And I used to work right down the hall from him. He would some days he'd step out, he'd go, Perry, come here and see this. And it was a brand new something on Pro Tools. I mean, he would tell me how to do it. And I would I have no idea what you just said, but that's the coolest thing I've ever heard. And so, later I would go back and go, okay, what was that you showed me again? And he would explain exactly how to do it. And it's just, it's a wonderful industry if you want to learn, just ask.
Well, I would love to talk to all of you all day long and ask you all the questions we didn't get to. But I think I just saw the bat signal go up. So that means Files has to get back to work on the Batman.
Can I just say one more thing?
Please.
Sorry. I know Will and Perry have given a shout out to their crew, but Nate and I both want to give a shout out to our incredible crew. Mike Fay, first assistant, Nick Ellsberg, second assistant, Ali Andrus, assistant, Tom Cabela, visual effects editor, Jeff Mee, visual effects assistant editor, Kurt Sobel, music editor. I mean, Rob Simonson, the composer, everybody on this movie worked their butts off, and it shows. And I think whoever hasn't seen the movie, go see it, because it's fantastic. And
Mark Patterson.
And Mark Patterson.
My mixing partner, Mark.
Dialogue music mixer. I mean, everybody just did a fantastic job. Are we missing anybody?
No, but I mean, the fact is that this is the film we were all working on and went through the pandemic together. So we really became a family and figured out how to work from home. And I don't think there's a crew I've worked with for a longer amount of time because of the pandemic, because of everything. And when we went out and got drinks the other night after the friends and family, the first argument we've ever had was who's paying for the drinks.
Exactly.
That's great.
Well, it was a great crew. It's a great movie. As Dana said, if you haven't seen it yet, go out and see it. If you have seen it, go see it again. And look for Will Files as your favorite Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. Thank you all for joining us today for this. And of course, thank you to our special guest from Ghostbusters Afterlife for being here today. Thank you, everybody. It was great to see you.
Thank you so much for having
Thanks
us.
for having us.
Thank you.
Good to see you guys, even you, Matt.
Thanks, Files.
Thank you.